They said a daughter was worth less than a silver coin, less than a bag of corn. And when her father spoke those words, "If we have no silver or corn, then we have our daughter. She will settle the debt." Anna's world shattered. With that cruel bargain, he sealed her fate. She was given away like an object, handed over to Sario, the widower who ruled the village. He owned every field, every roof, every stretch of soil that men worked under the sun. The people feared him as much as they envied his power. To her family, Anna was nothing more than payment for what they owed. To the villagers, she became the subject of gossip. But to herself, she felt like a prisoner walking into chains she never forged. The night she crossed the wide iron gates of the manor, her heart was heavy as stone. She expected to find a monster, a man made of anger and cruelty. But in those silent hours before dawn, she discovered something else. A broken man haunted by the ghost of a lost love. She had come as a servant to pay a debt not her own, yet fate was weaving her into a story of grief, redemption, and secrets buried within walls where even time refused to enter. The manor rose on the low hill like a watchful beast. From there, almost the entire village lay below, small and distant, like ants crawling over earth he already claimed. Its thick adobe walls bore the marks of years, cracks from rain, stains from sun, scars from storms. No paint softened it. No flowers dared bloom in its yard. The tall windows seemed like eyes that had long forgotten how to blink. The massive wooden doors creaked like tired guardians warning every visitor. Step carefully, for this is not your home. When Anna stepped inside, she felt the echo of her own footsteps chase her across the courtyard. Even the air moved slower here, as if it too obeyed the silence of the master. The smell of old wood and faint smoke from burning leaves clung to her skin. Chickens scratched in the corner of the yard, but no children laughed, no neighbors called, only the hollow whistle of wind against iron shutters. Then he appeared, Sario. Broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and time, his face lined with wrinkles carved deep like dry riverbeds. His eyes were dark and cold, hard as stones pulled from the river's bottom. His mouth seemed to have forgotten how to form a smile. He did not ask her name. He did not welcome her. He looked at her the way one examines a tool, measuring, calculating, deciding its use. No yelling here, no complaining. His voice was low and rough, like distant thunder. Without waiting for her answer, he turned and walked into the house. Anna understood in that moment. In this place, even the walls bowed to him. She followed quietly into the main room. A thick rug softened her steps, but the air remained heavy. Dust clung to carved furniture, and portraits of stern ancestors glared from the walls. Among them was the image of a woman with a sharp gaze and a scarf wrapped around her head, his first wife. Her painted eyes seemed to watch Anna, unwelcoming and unblinking. Sario pointed toward a narrow hallway. "There, your room." It was small, with a wooden bed covered by a worn sheet. A wardrobe smelled of moths and old age. The window opened only enough to show the faraway village, too distant to offer comfort. A locked chest rested near the bed. Its key, Anna knew, would never be in her hands. That night, lying under an unfamiliar roof, Anna felt loneliness settle over her like another blanket. She missed the soft clatter of her mother preparing dinner, the friendly calls of neighbors, the noise of life outside her old door. Here, there was only silence, broken only by the creak of old wood. She stared at the ceiling until the moonlight faded. Outside, Sario paced the veranda like a restless watchman, his shadow moving against the wall. And then Anna heard it, soft, muffled crying. It wasn't the moan of cows or the drunken laughter from the tavern below. No, it was the sound of grief being hidden, grief too heavy to carry. Slowly, carefully, Anna followed it into the yard. She stopped when she saw him. Sario knelt before a small stone altar, an oil lamp flickering at his side. In his hands he held a worn photograph of the same woman from the portrait, the wife he had lost. His lips trembled as he whispered to the night, "Forgive me for dying before I learned to deserve you." The words fell like rain on dry soil, soft, breaking the silence. Anna stood frozen, her heart beating fast. The man the village called Lord of the Land, the one they painted as merciless, was crying like a wounded child. He clutched the photograph to his chest, as if it were the last piece of light he owned. "You are my share of light," he whispered. "Forgive this hand that only knew command, not comfort." Anna stepped back quietly. The wooden floor creaked, but the night breeze through the cashew trees masked the sound. He never noticed her. He only knelt there, shoulders trembling, whispering his confessions to a face inside a frame. In that moment, Anna understood something the village never would. Behind his stern silence was a man cracked by grief, carrying a wound that no land, no wealth, no command could ever heal. The villagers asked, "Does he still know how to love?" But Anna now saw the truth. The question was not about love itself, but whether a man could live with the shadows left behind when love was torn away. She returned to her room, her heart heavy yet strangely softened. Her grandmother's words echoed, "A closed heart is like a pot on the fire without water, hot on the outside, burning within." And she realized this man, master of all, carried such a pot in his chest, boiling with memories and regrets. That night, sleep came only in fragments, carrying strange dreams of a woman in a white scarf, sunlight spilling across the courtyard, and laughter that no longer belonged to this house. When Anna woke to the rooster's crow, the confession still hung in the air. She saw the photographs again and noticed something different. The woman's face seemed softer now, as if grief itself had loosened its grip. And in the dust of the yard, 2 deep knee prints remained, proof that even the master of the village knelt before a sorrow he could not control. In the kitchen, stirring, "The pot," Anna whispered to herself. "Some wounds don't want to heal. They just need a witness." That night, she had witnessed his wound, the wound through which his soul bled. By morning, Sario returned to his stone-faced silence, eating without a word. But between them now existed a secret neither would name. Outside, the village woke to its noise and chatter. But inside the manor, the silence carried a crack, a place where maybe, just maybe, spring could slip in through winter's grip. Anna now understood. The question wasn't whether Sario could love again, but whether broken love could learn a gentler way to ache. And as the sun climbed over the trees, she thought that maybe her role here was not just to survive, but to bring a little light into the shadows. Morning came as always, but inside the manor, everything had changed. The first time Anna returned to the village market as Sario's wife, the sun was still low, gilding the gourds displayed at the stalls and making the freshly caught river fish shine. The women had been there since early morning, arranging piles of corn, organizing the green cassava leaves, exchanging news as if trading seeds. The smell of dried fish mixed with the sweet scent of ripe mangoes. And the buzz was the same as every Saturday until she arrived. The whispers started even before Anna passed the first stall. They came disguised as conversation, but with words, as sharp as freshly sharpened knives. "Look over there," the new lady of the manor once said, biting her smile as if it were expensive. "New wife," replied another, adjusting the cloth on her head. "No, my friend, just fresh meat to pay an old debt." And a third, pretending to choose tomatoes, added. They paid what they owed with her. Pound for round, the laughter that followed wasn't loud or scandalous. It was that short, poisoned kind that slips from the corner of the mouth and burns more than any shouted insult. Anna heard it all. Every syllable landed on her like a small stone, one that doesn't kill, but leaves a mark. Even so, she didn't respond. She kept walking, gripping the straw bags tightly like someone who knows that silence is sometimes louder than a scream. While weighing the beans, the vendor, middle-aged woman with curious eyes, asked, "And life at Thamanor?" Anna just gave a slight smile, the kind that doesn't fully open or close, and answered, "Life is only as big as our steps." She paid, thanked her, and walked away, leaving the question hanging in the air. The bags were light. She had only bought the essentials: a handful of beans, a bit of flour, some fresh leaves. But on the way back, the weight she felt didn't come from what she carried in her hands. It came from what she carried in her chest. It was the weight of being seen not as a person, but as a measurement. To those women, she wasn't Annie. She was the debt wife, the new woman at the manor, the one chosen by force. Walking down the narrow street that led to the tall gate, Anna remembered her mother's words spoken once before everything changed. "It's not what they place in your hands that makes you heave what they place on your name." That day she understood. Those laughs and whispers were attempts to hand her a name she hadn't chosen to bear. When she crossed the gate, the manor was quiet. Sario didn't ask what she had bought, nor why she had taken so long. He simply gave her that look, the one that weighed more than any phrase. Anna placed the bags on the table and went to the kitchen, lighting the fire calmly. As the flames rose, she felt something new inside her. It wasn't anger nor sadness. It was a kind of firmness that is born when someone tries to measure your worth by what they think they see, and you realize you don't fit that ruler. By late afternoon, she went out to the yard to gather firewood. The sky was already tinged red, and the wind blew colder. From a distance, she saw two of the women from the market walking down the road. They were laughing loudly, talking about something she couldn't hear. This time, Anna didn't look away. She looked straight at them, not in defiance, but as if to say without a word, "I know who I am. You still don't." That night, as she sat down to dinner, Svario noticed something different in her face. Maybe it was her straighter posture, maybe the less worn-out look in her eyes. He didn't say anything, but as he reached for his plate, he noticed she held the spoon with a steadiness she didn't have the day she arrived. The silence at the table was no longer just his. It was hers too, but a silence that stood tall, not one that was imposed. And so while the lanterns flickered and the wind brushed the walls of the manor, Anna was discovering that even surrounded by mouths ready to wound, she could learn to measure her own worth without borrowing anyone's ruler. Deep down, the market would continue to be at stage for laughter and venom. But inside her, a new ground had begun to open. A place where there was no debt, no nickname, no laugh, enough to define who she was. And that, she realized, was something no one could take away. The day began heavy with a dry heat that seemed to glue the dust of the road to the skin. Since early morning, Anna had kept herself busy sweeping the yard, washing clothes, and tending the fire in the kitchen. The manor, despite its size, had few servants, and most of the workload fell on her. Not that anyone had clearly said so, but in Cilio's house rules weren't spoken. They were lift and silence, more than words dictated who was supposed to do what. By noon the sun hit so hard that even the shadows looked tired. Anna was still on her feet, stirring the stew pot when she felt her hands trembling and her body begging for rest. She looked at the plate and a wooden spoon the way one looks at a burden. She took a deep breath, and instead of setting the table, sat down on the bench, letting the smell of the food fill the air. It was at that moment that Saria walked in. Firm steps, broad shoulders, worn hat in hand. He stopped at the kitchen door and for a moment simply watched. The usual routine was simple. She would set his plate on the table. He would eat, and silence was the seasoning. But that day she didn't move. She remained seated, hands in her lap, her gaze steady, not defiant, just steady. "Not going to serve?" he asked, his voice dry but without raising it. "I'm not barter cattle," Anna replied slowly, as if not wanting her words to fall to the ground in a rush. There was a moment when the air seemed to stop. Silvario said nothing. He just stood there motionless, as if weighing the gravity of that sentence. In another time he might have ordered her to stand or throw in a sharp command. But not this time. He simply pulled the plate toward him, served himself, and ate in silence. Anna watched from a distance. The sound of the spoon hitting the plate was the only noise in the kitchen. There was no anger in his face, but there wasn't surprise either. It was as if inside he recognized that this woman was no longer willing to lie bowed under the weight of a debt that wasn't hers. When he finished, Savelio got up, washed his own plate at the sink, and went out to the veranda. He stood looking at the yard as if searching the horizon for a reason to speak again. She stayed in the kitchen, stirring the rest of the food, but feeling within her a new kind of strength. Not the strength needed to carry buckets or chop wood, but the strength of having claimed her own place, and of having been heard even in silence. Outside the wind began to shift, bringing clouds that announced rain. Anna knew that from that day forward things between them would no longer be the same. Not that the manor would fill with words or smiles, but something had been broken in the old cycle. She was no longer just the woman handed over as payment. She was someone who could sit, pause, and say, no. In the late afternoon, Celio came in, again. He grabbed his hat, adjusted it on his head, and without looking directly at her said, "Tomorrow we go to the fields early." The phrase simple carried a silent acceptance. It wasn't a dry command. It was an implicit invitation, and in his own way, perhaps it was even a gesture of recognition. Anna didn't answer with words. She simply nodded and returned to her tasks in the kitchen. The smell of wet earth began to drift into the room, and she felt that just as the rain announced new life for the fields, that seemingly small moment was silently watering the seed of something different between them. That night, as she lay down, she remembered a saying she once heard at the market: "A crooked tree only straightens when it meets a strong wind." Maybe, she thought, that day had been the first wind strong enough to stir Sario's roots. And without realizing it, she too had straightened a bit. The manor remained as silent as always, but deep down something had changed. It was as if the walls, so used to witnessing only obedience, had now seen something new. The kind of respect that is born when someone understands that dignity is not up for negotiation, not for debt, and not out of fear. The first time the healer appeared at the manor was on a gray morning, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. She arrived on foot, leaning on a crooked staff, a printed scarf tied around her head, and a straw basket hanging from her arm. She didn't knock at the door or call for anyone. She simply walked through the gate, as if she already knew she didn't need to ask for permission. The dogs who barked at any stranger simply stepped aside as if they recognized the old woman's scene. Suvidia met her on the Vare, and unlike how he received other visitors, he didn't use that usual cold stare. On the contrary, there was a kind of respect in his eyes that Anna had never seen before. There was no embrace, but there was a different silence, the kind that says more than any word. Without much exchange, he led her to the kitchen where the fire still burned low beneath a pot of beans. The old woman's name was Mara. In the village, everyone knew she understood the ways of the earth like no one else. She knew the medicine hidden in every leaf, the power of each root, the right time to pick what heals and what kills. They said even the plants tilted their leaves when she walked by. She sat slowly on the wooden bench, pulled a bundle of fresh herbs from the basket, and began separating them leaf by leaf with fingers that, though wrinkled, were as steady as vine. Anna watched in silence. She didn't know whether to offer help or simply observe. Mara lifted her eyes and in a quiet tone said, "His body is tough, but his heart, its dry clay, only swells with good rain." The words lingered in the air like smoke that's slow to fade. Denisa didn't ask what she meant, but deep down she felt the old woman wasn't talking about illness of the body, but of a kind of thirst that can't be quenched with water. As she chopped the leaves, Mara shared scattered stories. She spoke of people healed from fevers with cashew bark tea, wounds closed with honey and aloe balm, children saved with rue and rosemary baths. Between one story and another, she glanced sideways at Anna, not as if to judge her appearance, but her soul. "And you, dear?" she asked suddenly. "Are you taking care of yourself or just of others?" Anna lowered her eyes. She didn't answer right away. It was a simple question, but heavy, like a sack of flour on the back. "Around here," she said slowly, "we learn to take care without expecting care in return." Ma smiled, a short smile, but one that seemed to know everything. "That's where the sickness lives, the one that kills from the inside." The conversation was interrupted when Sario entered carrying a sack of cassava. He set the weight on the floor and stood watching them. He didn't ask what they were talking about. He simply took a handful of leaves from the basket, smelled them, and set them back. There was a familiarity in him toward that woman that Anna didn't understand, as if she were one of the few people who could cross the iron barrier. He built around himself. Mora stayed until mid-afternoon. She mawed a thick broth with roots. Anna had never seen taught her how to brew a tea that cleans the blood and left behind a jar of ointment for aches. Before leaving, she placed a hand on Anna's shoulder and said, "Dry clay needs more than rain. It needs hands that know how to shape." On the way to the gate, Silvario walked her out. They didn't exchange many words, but Anna saw him pull a folded cloth from his pocket and place it in her hands. Mora didn't open it. She just tucked it into her basket and went on her way. After she left, the house felt different, not lighter, but as if it had received a breath of something ancient and respected. Anna went to store the leftover herbs, and as she organized each bundle, she felt she was putting away more than plants. She was storing a kind of silent advice, a reminder that even the hardest things can change shape if touched by the right hands. That night before sleeping, Mora's words returned to her only swells with good rain. Anna knew she had no power over the sky, but maybe she could learn to be rain in the life of someone who for a long time had only known drought. And so the manor which once seemed closed even to time received a small breath of new wind, the kind of wind that doesn't tear down walls, but opens cracks where life can slowly make its way in. The day began stifling with heavy air and the smell of warm earth, spreading across the yard. Since early morning, Anna had found it strange not to hear Silvario's firm footsteps echoing through the veranda. He was usually up before the sun touched the leaves of the cashew tree, pacing back and forth, inspecting the yard like a general who knows every inch of his land. But that morning, the menorah seemed to wait for a command that never came. When Anna knocked on his bedroom door, there was no response. She pushed, it opened slowly, feeling the soft creak of the wood, and found him lying there, his face pale and his eyes half closed. A thin layer of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his chest rose and fell faster than usual. His breathing was raw, like a dry leaf being dragged by the wind. "Are you feeling something?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Just the heat," he murmured, trying to wave away the question with his hand, but the weak gesture said otherwise. Anna touched his forehead and felt the burning heat. This wasn't just the weather. It was fever. She left without saying a word, went to the kitchen and began preparing a tea with cashew leaves, recalling the instructions Mora had left. While the water boiled, she gathered clean cloths, a bowl of fresh water, and a dish of light broth. She returned to the room and, without waiting for him to ask, dampened a cloth and placed it on his forehead. "There's no need," he said in a faint voice, as if trying to cling to a dignity that illness was insisting on taking away. "There is." "Yes," she replied with quiet firmness. "Not even the lord of the village can command a body when it decides to stop." Co closed his eyes and didn't reply. Anna adjusted the pillow, changed the cloth on his forehead, and sat beside the bed, watching his every movement. The manor, which usually breathed in a slow rhythm, seemed to hold its breath. That afternoon, the few servants found reasons to step away, as if unwilling to face the master's vulnerability. She spent the entire day at his side. When the fever spiked, she changed the cloths. When it subsided, she gave him sips of tea. Sometimes he seemed to sleep. At other times, he opened his eyes and looked at her, not with authority, but with a strange mix of exhaustion and quiet gratitude. At night, as the wind finally brought a hint of coolness, Celio awoke from a short nap. He found Anna still there, slouched in the chair, fighting off sleep. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice weaker than usual. "Because someone needs to be," she answered simply. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. When he spoke again, the words came so softly they nearly got lost in the sound of the wind. "If it were another time, I would choose you, my flower." Anna didn't move. The unexpected words fell on her like gentle rain on dry ground. They weren't a plea, nor a promise. They were recognition, and coming from someone who spent his life guarding emotions like rare coins. They were worth more than gold. She didn't respond. She simply adjusted the blanket over him, changed the cloth on his forehead, and watched the man who, in the eyes of the village, was unshakable, but who now slept with his head tilted to the side, as vulnerable as anyone else the next morning. The fever had broken. Silvario got up slowly, drank the tea she brought without saying a word, and spent the day quieter than usual. There were no explicit thanks, no sudden change in his manner. But as he passed her in the hallway, he placed his hand on her shoulder. For a moment, a brief gesture, but full of something that needed no explanation. Anna knew that that touch and those words from the night before were like seeds planted in hard earth. They might take time to sprout. They might never bloom the way she imagined, but they were there, buried where no one could uproot them. That day, the manor returned to its routine, but their relationship between them was no longer the same. And deep down, Anna understood that some changes don't need to be seen to be real. Some live only in the space between two people, a space that sometimes just one act of care is enough to change forever. The rumor ran through the village like rainwater rushing down the hill. Sario, the man who guarded Heisland as if it were an extension of his own body, had called the community leaders to a meeting. No one knew for sure the reason. Some said he was selling property. Others believed he intended to evict families who had occupied pieces of land for decades. But no one, not even the oldest among them, could imagine what was about to happen. It was a clear afternoon, and the sun lay lazily over the fields when the people began to arrive. They came from all directions, farmers with calloused hands, shepherds with wind-burned faces, and even widowed women who managed small plots of inherited land. Everyone settled on the manor's large porch, a place that until then had only been used for quick meetings or to shelter workers on stormy days. Anna, from inside the kitchen, watched through a crack in the door. Severo stood leaning on the wooden railing, a leather folder tucked under his arm. His posture was the same as always, firm, composed. But there was something different in his expression, as if he carried a decision within himself that could no longer be undone. When everyone had quieted, he began to speak. His deep voice echoed through the yard, reaching even those furthest back. "I've spent my life accumulating," he said. "Land, cattle, houses, everything my eyes could see. I did it because I believed that's how a man stayed standing. But in the end, I realized I spent too much time looking at what was mine and too little time looking at what others lacked." The men looked at one another, confused. That was not the speech they were expecting. Sario opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I called you here because I want to change that while I'm still alive. I want to divide the land. I want the families who've always worked it to have papers that say it's theirs." A murmur swept through the porch. No one dared interrupt, but the astonishment was clear. So Vu continued, "Some will say it's madness. Others will think I've finally gone crazy. But I know I've commanded enough, and now I want to give back." One of the village leaders, Athen man with a slow way of speaking, asked, "And you, sir, what will you keep for yourself?" "Suve, you paused enough to live on. But what I really want is to rest, knowing I won't leave behind just walls and fences. I want to leave space for others to grow." Anna, listening, felt a mix of surprise and respect. She knew that man had layers the village would never know, but she hadn't expected to see him make a decision that would shake the very foundation of power. For hours he explained how the division would work, which families would receive which plots, how the deeds would be registered, and how each person should care for what would become theirs. It wasn't empty charity. It was a kind of late justice, the kind only someone who had carried the burden of ownership could offer. When the meeting ended, some stepped forward to thank him. Others still looked doubtful, but everyone left differently than they had arrived. The conversations continued along the road, and by the next day, the market was buzzing with the news. Many called it madness. Others said it was just a strategy to cleanse his conscience. But there were those who in silence understood that some decisions can't be explained with logic, only with the heart. That night Suvio sat on the veranda staring out into the darkness of the fields. Anna brought him a mug of coffee and sat beside him. For several minutes they said nothing. Then he said, almost as if to himself, "The weight of ownership is heavier than the weight of lack." Anna simply nodded. She knew that gesture wouldn't erase years of harshness, nor would it change what people thought of him. But she also knew that for those receiving it, that piece of land meant more than any bitter memory. The night breeze passed gently, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and cool earth. And in the silence that followed, Anna realized that perhaps, for the first time, the man who once ruled over the entire village was starting to learn the value of sharing. The harvest festival was the most anticipated moment of the year. The entire village gathered in the central square, which on that day came alive in a different way. Colorful cloth pennants fluttered in the wind. Long tables were covered with hand-embroidered linens and the mix of scents. Roasted corn, toasted peanuts, meat on skewers seemed to embrace every visitor. Children ran between the stalls, elders told old stories, and the drums beat a rhythm everyone had known since childhood. It was also a day when social differences became more visible. The wealthier families arrived early, well-dressed, taking the best seats. The poorer folk stayed on the edges, watching, sharing food, laughing when they could. Sario every year kept to his custom. He appeared alone, walked slowly through the square, received respectful greetings, and then stood in the shade of a stall, observing the celebration without joining in. But that year, something changed. When the sun was high and the square was already buzzing with people, Anna was getting ready to fetch some water. She still wasn't sure whether she should stay near the center of the festival or remain under the shade of the trees, far from curious eyes. That's when she felt a firm hand take hers. She turned to the side. It was Vario. Without saying a word, He began to walk, leading her with him. He didn't rush, but he also didn't seem to hesitate. People began to notice, and the murmur started to spread. No one in the village had seen Celio walk hand in hand with a woman since the death of his first wife, and certainly no one imagined seeing him do it with Anna, the woman given in payment of a debt. They crossed the entire square. Eyes turned like sunflowers following the sun. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the children, curious, slowed their pace too. Watch when they reached Thetable, where Annie's family sat. The silence was nearly absolute. Her father, holding his worn hat in his hands, seemed unsure of where to look. Her mother, rigid, kept her face still, as if afraid any expression might betray what she felt. Then Sario spoke, his voice, deep and steady, cut through the square like a lone drum. You gave her to me as a debt, but she paid my soul. The words weren't only for her family. They were for everyone present, for every ear that had ever repeated the story of the woman traded for a debt, for every tongue that had mocked or judged. The silence lingered. No one dared laugh. Noon looked away. Even the wind seemed to pause and listen. Anna stood still, feeling the weight and power of that moment. She didn't know whether it was an apology, a declaration, or just a gesture of recognition, but she knew that from that moment on, it would be impossible for the village to keep looking at her the same way. After several long seconds, Sario let go of her hand, took a step back, and motioned for her to join the other women at the table. Then, without ceremony, he went to greet a few men as if nothing had happened. But what needed to happen had already been done. The rest of the festival went on as usual. Food, music, dancing. But there was a new layer of silence in the conversations. Some avoided speaking near her. Others, curious, came to make small talk. The women who once mocked her at the market now chose their words carefully, not because they had changed their opinion of her, but because they understood that the man who owned the land and made the decisions had placed her name and face in a place of respect. When night fell and the torches were lit, Anna sat in a corner of the square, watching the flames dance in the wind. She could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers. It wasn't love, perhaps not even affection, but it was, without a doubt, a public recognition no one expected, and that in that village was worth more than any promise. The next morning, the story had already spread through every home, crossed every gate. Some said it was proof that Sario was changing. Others claimed he just wanted to show power. But for Anna, the interpretation didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time, she was no longer remembered only as the woman who had been given away, but as someone who in some way had made the most closed-off man in the village open a door, even if just a little, in front of everyone. And that gesture, silent and firm, had silenced more than sharp tongues. It had silenced even the doubt she herself carried about her own worth. The day was calm, one of those days when the sun doesn't burn too harshly and the wind blows slowly, as if trying to push the hours forward at its own pace. Anna Wasson, the Ver mending an old sheet, when she saw a tall man approaching along the road. He held a crumpled felt hat in his hands, and his steps were hesitant like someone walking on unfamiliar ground. But there was something about him, the shape of his face, the firmness in his shoulders that reminded her of Silvario. She didn't need to ask herself for long. She knew who he was, the son of the first wife, the same one people in the village said had distanced himself years ago after a bitter argument with his father. The rumors claimed he had left out of pride and hurt, and had never crossed the manna gates again. The man stopped in front of her, still without stepping inside. He took a deep breath, and his voice came out in a tone that mixed respect and discomfort. "I'm a deal, I know," Anna replied, resting the fabric on her lap. There was a silence that wasn't just about words. It was also about untold stories, about memories heavier than stones. Adil looked around as if searching for something to say until his eyes settled on hers. "I need to talk to my father, but first I want to speak to you." Anna didn't move. She nodded toward the empty chair beside her. Adil sat down, but didn't look at her directly. I heard what happened at the festival," he said, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion. "I wasn't here, but what I was told. I never thought my father was capable of something like that." He paused and took a deep breath. "I want to ask for your forgiveness. Forgiveness for believing the stories I was told about you. I thought you were just another woman taking my mother's place. I thought you were here out of interest and because of a debt that had nothing to do with you." The words came out heavy, like stones being pulled from his pockets. Anna listened without interrupting. "But now I see that you were the one who gave dignity to my mother's name. It was you who made my father look at people as people again." There was a heavy silence broken only by the sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the cashew tree. Then Anna spoke, her voice calm but steady. "Around here, no one needs to kneel to be forgiven." She said nothing more. She stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with 2 cups of tea. She placed one in front of him and sat again. Adil accepted the gesture without protest. They sat there sipping tea in silence, as if that simple act was in itself a bridge between 2 very different worlds. When Silvario appeared on the veranda, the meeting between father and son was brief, but full. They looked at each other for a long time, and there was no anger, only a mixture of weariness and recognition. The old man said nothing, only gave his son a light pat on the shoulder and went inside. Adil stayed a while longer, spoke of village matters, and then said goodbye, promising to return. That day, Anna understood that forgiveness is sometimes not a spoken word, but an open space where someone can return. And she also realized that without having planned it, she had become not only the guardian of the manor, but of the possibility of reconciliation between father and son. That night, when the wind once again carried the scent of cool earth, she thought of something Mara the healer had said weeks earlier. Dry clay only swells with good rain. Maybe she thought it wasn't just Sario who needed that rain. Maybe the whole family in their own way was thirsty. And for the first time, Anna didn't feel the weight of being at the manor as someone who had been handed over. She felt like someone who, in some way, had helped bring life back to a soil everyone had once believed to be barren. The day began like any other, with sunlight filtering through the cracks in the windows and the distant sound of roosters announcing the morning. Silvario had woken up early as usual, but unlike other days, he didn't head straight to the fields or call anyone to give orders. He sat on the verge slowly sipping his coffee, watching the yard with a serene air he rarely showed. Anna noticed the change but said nothing. She simply continued her routine, sensing there was something different in that silence, not the harsh silence of before, but a silence that felt full. Throughout the day, he walked around the property, visited the orchard, ran his hand along the fences, and chatted with 1 or 2 workers. He stopped to watch the children chasing after an improvised ball, and in an unexpected gesture, pulled some coins from his pocket and handed them to the boy who had scored the goal. He laughed. It was a short laugh, but genuine one that lit up his time-worn face, if only for a moment. In the afternoon, asked Anna to make his favorite dish, country-style chicken with okra. He sat at the table and ate slowly, as if savoring not just the food, but the moment itself, between bites. He said little, but every word seemed carefully chosen. "You know, Anna," he said, gazing out the window now, "finally, everything I own has meaning." She didn't reply, but felt a different warmth in her chest. That sentence wasn't about land, cattle, or houses. It was about the peace he seemed to carry in that moment. When night fell, the wind brought the smell of distant rain. The sky darkened quickly and the first stars began to appear. Sario sat again on the verge, asked her to join him, and they sat there looking out at the horizon. They didn't talk much, but it was enough for Anna to feel there was a quiet understanding between them. Later he retired to his room. After blowing out the lanterns and closing the windows, Anna went to check if he needed anything. She found him lying down, head resting on the pillow, his body covered to the chest. His face was calm, and there was a faint smile on his lips. "Good night, my flower," he said in a low voice. Anna smiled back, turned off the light, and left the door slightly ajar. At that moment, she had no idea those would be the last words she would ever hear from him. During the night, the rain arrived, gently tapping the roof and bringing a coolness to the air. The manor, wrapped in the sound of water and wind, seemed to rest alongside its residents. But at dawn, when Anna entered the room to wake him, She knew Silvaria was still in the same position, the smile still on his face, but his chest no longer moved. Time stopped for a moment. She stood there looking at him, feeling a mix of sorrow and gratitude. There was no pain on his face, only a deep rest, like someone who had finally found peace. The news spread quickly through the village. People came from all over to say goodbye. Workers, neighbors, even those who had once feared or criticized him. Many commented they had never seen Sario so serene. Others said he had left at the right time after making peace with life. Anna handled everything, calmly. She dressed him in the clothes he loved most and placed by the bedside a small portrait of his first wife and another of herself, the one he had kept in recent months. There was no wailing, no dramatic grief. It was a quiet mourning, like the life he had learned to live in his final days. When she finally closed the bedroom door, Anna felt that something had ended, but not as a painful farewell. It was more like the closing of a cycle, the kind that leaves behind not only scars, but fruit. And as she looked up at the gray sky of that morning, she remembered his words from the day before. Now, finally, everything I own has meaning. In that moment she understood that for it wasn't land or riches that gave life meaning. It was the hands and hearts he had been able to reach. And somehow she was at the very center of that. The day of the burial dawned overcast, as if the sky too wished to mourn. The entire village seemed to have paused. Men, women, and children gathered in the main square to accompany the procession. There was no rush, only steady steps, and the deep sound of drums marking the rhythm of farewell. The coffin, simple but well cared for, led the way, carried by 4 of Cilio's most trusted men. Behind it came Anna, dressed in black but without the veil usually imposed on widows. She walked with her head held high, her expression firm, not denying the sadness but not allowing herself to be bent by it either. The burial took place in the village's small cemetery beneath the shade of an old baobab tree. When the final shovel full of earth was laid, the drums fell silent, and a hush fell over the place. Some expected Anna to break down in tears. Others imagined she would retreat into the solitude of the manor. But instead she remained there, standing before the grave like someone sealing a silent pact. Then she turned and walked back the same path, receiving respectful embraces and condolences on the days that followed. The house didn't fill with silence, as many had expected. On the contrary, people from all corners of the village began to arrive. Some came to pay their respects. Others brought small mementos of Cilio, a piece of wood he had carved, a tool he had lent, a story few had heard. With each visit, Anna learned more about the man who not long ago she herself had known only by his hard exterior, but the true legacy she inherited wasn't in the stories, nor in the keys to the manor, nor in the deeds to the land. It was in the possibility of turning that space into something alive. And that's exactly what she did. The first changes were simple. She opened the windows that had stayed shut for years, letting in the wind and the scent of the village. Then, she began to reorganize the rooms. The room where Svario had slept, she left untouched a space of memory. But the others, once left to the dust, were transformed. One became a study room for children, another a shelter for women in need of temporary refuge. Little by little, the manor stopped being seen as an untouchable place. Every morning, the gates stood open, and it became common to see children coming in to learn how to read, elders sitting on the porch telling stories, and young people helping out in the garden. And Isa tended in the back. She didn't ask anyone where they came from or why they were there. She simply welcomed them. Dot at the market where she had once been the target of whispers and mockery. She was now greeted with respect. The same mouths that once mocked her now sought her advice, came for words to help resolve conflicts, or simply for an ear willing to listen. She held no grudges, but she didn't forget either. She knew the respect she had earned did not come from fear, but from a dignity she had never let be taken from her. The name she once carried like a burden, the woman who was given away, disappeared from conversations. People now called her mother of the village, not because she had children of her own, but because her care, her strength, and her presence had become part of everyone's life. One day, as she walked through the market, the wind blew stronger, carrying the scent of bread baking in some distant oven. That's when she noticed something curious. The murmur around her quieted as she passed. It wasn't silence born of fear, nor of disdain. It was a silence of respect, as if even the wind and the voices knew that this woman had walked through something greater than judgment. She sat on a nearby bench and watched the movement around her. She thought of everything she had lived through since the day she first walked through Thamana Gate, carrying only a bundle of clothes and an empty gaze. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, the laughter at the market, the sleepless nights, when she uncovered Sario's hidden sorrow, and most of all, she remembered how little by little she had found her own place, not because it was given to her, but because she built it now. The village had a new story to tell about her, and maybe that was the true inheritance Sario had left her. Not Thieland, not the walls, but the freedom to be who she was without debts defining her. As the sun set behind the hills, Anna rose, adjusted the cloth on her head, and walked back home. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, that the world hadn't suddenly become easier. But she also knew she no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. And deep down, she was certain that no matter how much time passed, her name would remain in the village's memory, not as a bargaining chip, but as a symbol of strength, dignity, and renewal. And so, in the respectful silence that followed her, Anna walked in. Because destiny, even when delayed, never fails the just. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our